Be part of the peace movement. Share this episode using hashtag the Great Disarmament and download the free peace resource guide at aviskalfsbeck.com/peace guide. The Great Disarmament, The Great Disfarmament, Part 11, Fallout and Flower Power. Hi, I'm Avis Kalfsbeck. This is The Great Disarmament, The Great Disfarmament, a podcast tracing the parallel histories of how we learn to kill and how we might stop. If you're just joining us, welcome. Each episode maps a moment in the intertwined stories of war and agriculture, violence and renewal. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 did more than end a war. They marked the beginning of an entirely new era, one in which humanity gained the power to destroy itself completely. In the aftermath, the world reorganized itself around fear. The Cold War emerged not as a conventional battle, but as a prolonged geopolitical standoff defined by nuclear tension, East and West, us and them. But while governments prepared for annihilation, ordinary people around the world began to choose another path. Even in the long shadow of fallout, a different kind of power took root. This episode is about that moment when flowers bloomed in the face of bombs, when protest songs rang louder than sirens, when disarmament became more than a policy, it became a movement. This is where we name the start of the Great Disarmament, 1963. If the First World War cracked the world open and the Second fused power with destruction, then what followed was a moral and existential reckoning. In 1945, 2 bombs fell, hundreds of thousands perished, and for the first time, the planet entered what scientists called the nuclear age. The arms race that followed was not just a race for supremacy, it was a race toward the edge. Weapons grew faster, farther reaching, and more devastating. Cold War logic took hold. If one side could annihilate the other, perhaps no one would dare begin. This doctrine of mutually assured destruction shaped politics, science, and society for decades. Yet in the cracks of this fear, something unexpected began to grow. A Buddhist monk set himself ablaze in protest. A young woman placed a daisy in the barrel of a soldier's rifle. A veteran returned home and refused to pick up another gun. This episode is titled Fallout and Flower Power. It marks the cultural beginning of what we now call the Great Disarmament. The decades after World War II were marked by an escalation of weaponry never before seen in human history. Among the most devastating are atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, hydrogen bombs developed shortly thereafter, capable of destroying entire regions, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, bringing the threat of nuclear war to every corner of the globe. Nuclear submarines patrolling silently beneath the seas, ready to retaliate at a moment's notice. Chemical weapons like napalm and Agent Orange deployed in the Vietnam War. This was not simply war, it was a global balancing act on the brink of extinction. For many, the only hope of survival was to stop believing in winning. In the face of overwhelming force, people organized, resisted, and imagined another way. This is the cultural birth of the Great Disarmament. The phrase doesn't refer solely to treaties or summit talks, though those were important. It refers to something deeper and more lasting, a shift in human consciousness. Among the many movements and voices, Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombs in Japan, told their stories to the world. Vietnam War protesters flooded cities with their refusal to condone unjust violence. Conscientious objectors defied the draft, some going to jail, others into exile. Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp in the UK became a powerful, sustained act of civil disobedience. Artisan folk singers like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan gave peace a melody and a message. Teenagers organized candlelight vigils and teach-ins. Monks meditated at missile sites. This era also saw formal progress. In 1963, the Limited Test Ban Treaty banned nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. In 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed by 62 nations, committing them to curbing the spread of nuclear weapons. In the 1970s, the SALT talks, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, began, marking the start of high-level nuclear restraint. Were these measures enough? No, but they were more than symbolic. They were the first cracks in the armor. If the 1920s were the first breath of disarmament, the 1960s and 70s were its first clear march. This is the episode where we name the beginning, not the beginning of bombs, that started long before, but the beginning of refusal. In 1963, the world's nuclear powers signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty, banning atomic testing in the air and sea. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a treaty shaped by protests, science, grief, and hope. And we mark that year, 1963, as the cultural beginning of the Great Disarmament. On April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered what would become his most controversial speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. Standing in the pulpit of Riverside Church in New York City, he named what few were willing to. I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos, he said, without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. With those words, King crossed an invisible line. He was no longer speaking solely of civil rights. He was speaking of war, empire, and what he called the deadly Western arrogance that justified them both. He was warned not to say it. Newspapers turned on him. Politicians withdrew support. Even allies in the movement told him to stay in his lane. But King refused to separate racism, poverty, and militarism. He called for what he named a radical revolution of values, a shift from things to people, from profit to peace. He said, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. In that speech, we hear not only critique but conscience, not only resistance but redemption. This is the voice we return to in moments of fracture, the voice that reminds us peace is not passive, it is a form of truth-telling. What it means for us. Disarmament is not the product of a single moment or a single treaty. It is the product of people choosing peace again and again, even when it costs them. It is monks burning, mothers marching, students singing, and survivors speaking. It's not tidy, it's not perfect, but it is real. And when you see nuclear physicists, Buddhist monks, anti-war veterans, and high school students all calling for the same thing, you start to believe that peace is more than a dream. It's a movement. It's a refusal to be ruled by fear. It's a way of life. From the page to the soil. Our literary lens today comes from Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, published in 1969 at the height of the Vietnam-era resistance. Vonnegut, a World War II veteran himself, wrote not with glorification, but with devastating satire. His protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, becomes unstuck in time, drifting between the bombing of Dresden and a distant planet, mirroring the disorientation of war and trauma. But what makes Slaughterhouse-Five a peace text is not its science fiction. It is its unwavering insistence that war is absurd, obscene, and tragic. The novel closes with birdsong after death, a soft chirp of life after annihilation. Vonnegut's work reminds us that resisting war is not naive. It is human, that telling the truth, especially with humor, is a form of protest, and that every act of peace begins with imagination. In our next episode, we examine the logic behind weapons escalation and the ideological frameworks that continue to justify it. We'll explore the shifting terrain of modern military rhetoric in the episode called Arms and Arguments. I'll see you there. That wraps up this episode of Peace is Here. Will you please take a moment to subscribe and share it with a friend? Subscribing helps others discover peaceful, independent storytelling, and it means a lot to me. I'm Avis Kalfsbeck, author of the Pedro the Water Dog Saves the Planet series, eco-adventure novellas for readers who care about environmental justice, joy, and saving the world one story at a time. You can learn more at aviskalfsbeck.com. Book 6, Mono Mutante, is now available at all major online retailers, or if you'd like to support my book directly, you can get the ebook at aviskalfsbeck.com/mono-mutante. It's a wild satirical ride through food, farming, and the messiness of recovery. When you subscribe to my list, you'll also be the first to hear about my next book, Bulletproof, which asks, what in the world are we going to do about guns? A link to subscribe is in the show notes. From October 18th to November 8th, 2025, I'm running a live Kickstarter campaign. I'd be so grateful if you'd visit aviskalfsbeck.com/Kickstarter to get notified. I'm creating a companion field journal for Book 1, One More Year, called Peace Stuff Primer, along with a stage play version of the book. I can't wait to share it with you. This episode was human narrated by me with the help of AI, which has promised to let me know if it ever makes something up. So far, no confessions, but if you think I've missed something or if you just want to say hello, I'd love to hear from you. Podcast music is by Javier Peque Rodriguez. You'll find links to his music on Spotify and Bandcamp in the show notes. I'm Avis Kalfsbeck. Thank you again. Until next time, listen for the peace.